this forum. I've spoken to you before, and I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm glad to have here my wife Cheryl and my daughter Alexis, and they're glad to be here as well. This is our date night. That's how it works. I'm glad to be here. As mentioned, I'm a fifth-generation Arizonan. I was raised on a ranch in Snowflake. I have 10 brothers and sisters. I have 69 first cousins on my father's side alone. So when they say that Congress's popularity is down to paid staff and blood relatives, in my case, that's still a pretty good base. If I can just build on that a little, then I'll be all right. But I appreciate being here. I'm running for Congress, for the Senate, because I think the federal government is too big and it taxes and regulates too much. That's how I've always felt, and that's how I voted. For 8 straight years in Washington, I was named by the National Taxpayers Union, who takes every vote that has a tax or spending implication that any member of Congress casts. I was voted the most fiscally responsible member of Congress for 8 years running. Not an A grade or a B grade or a C grade, but number 1 out of 535. And I'm proud of that. I think that we are spending too much. If there's one danger in Washington right now that dwarfs everything else, it is our looming debt and our deficit. We are not far away from having the same outlook as Greece. We're going to have a treasury auction and no buyers for our debt unless we get this debt and deficit under control. That's why we need to elect somebody who is willing and has shown the record of being able to stand up to spending, stand up against regulation, no matter which party is in charge. I have that record in the House, and I'll take that record to the Senate. So thank you for having me here, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have. Arizona has many advantages that other states don't. We have an educated population. We have universities here. We have climate. And it's a place that is attractive to come. I think it says something that 10 years ago we got 2 new members of Congress. Now we're getting another one. So people are moving to Arizona for good reason. As far as attracting businesses here, we have to have people in Washington who realize that the role of the federal government is not to pick winners and losers in the economy, not to pick this industry, this company or that company, but to establish a conducive tax and regulatory environment that all business can flourish in, including those here in Arizona. So that's the role of a member of Congress. That's what I'll do in the Senate. Down the deficit, pay down the debt. That's what we have to do. Right now we have a $16 trillion debt and a $1.2 trillion deficit. So we're adding that deficit to the debt every year. Any increased revenue that we get into Washington with lower tax rates, we need lower tax rates, particularly the corporate tax rate. If we want to keep companies like Intel here in Arizona and many others, we have to have a lower corporate tax rate. We can do that and still bring in additional revenue. If you pass pro-growth tax policy, you bring in additional revenue, and with that revenue, you pay down our deficit and ultimately pay down our debt. I've never supported amnesty. Amnesty, by definition, is an unconditional pardon for a breach of law. The best example of it is what we did in 1986, where we said, if you've been here for 5 years and you can prove it, then you get a shortcut to a green card. And you move in front of the line ahead of everybody else who is going through the legal, orderly process. The legislation that I've supported, that I introduced, the Strive Act, was not amnesty. It said that if you're here and you wish to adjust your status, you first pay a fine, then you learn English, then you pay back taxes, then you go back to your home country and register, and you could not adjust your status until everybody in the line had gone through the line, those that were going through the legal, orderly process. So I've not changed my mind on amnesty at all. I have changed my mind on comprehensive immigration reform, or rather, I've simply recognized, as Senator Kyle, Senator McCain, and many others who worked on broad-based immigration reform, that until we have better border security, nobody is going to trust the federal government to move ahead with the other elements of reform. If we can make the Tucson sector look like the Yuma sector, then we can tackle the other issues with immigration reform. Like, for example, we realized as soon as we secure the border that nearly half of those who are here illegally didn't sneak across the border. They came legally and overstayed a visa. So there are a lot of things we need to do with regard to immigration reform, but it has to start with securing the border. Well, we did pass the audit the Fed bill just last week. That's a start. I think that the Fed is too opaque. It does need to become more transparent. But one thing we can't do, the only thing worse than opaqueness at the Fed, is Congress believing that Congress should have a greater role in declaring what should be going on. That's worse, believe me. What I think we should start with the Fed is get rid of the dual role or the dual mandate. Right now, a lot of people don't realize that the Fed not only has a charge to make sure that we have sound currency, that's a charge that they should have, but they also have a charge to decrease unemployment. And those things often go against each other, and that's why you've seen the Fed go crazy, simply buying our own debt, quantitative easing, and monetary policy that means that inflation will surely come. So the thing we really need to do right off the bat is get rid of the dual role that the Fed performs right now. Great. Your primary role is to uphold the Constitution and go and represent your state. And to do that, when you swear an oath to the Constitution, I believe that that oath to the Constitution means that you abide by the principles that you believe in, like limited government, economic freedom, and individual responsibility. If a member of the Senate does that, it'll be great for small business in Gilbert and everywhere else. Right now, we have an issue where the Senate hasn't passed a budget in more than 3 years. When the Senate doesn't pass a budget, it has all the effects that you would think. You can't prioritize your spending. You simply can't hold a budget if you don't pass one or hold to it. But it also has another effect that every business in Gilbert is feeling. When you don't pass a budget in the Senate, it means that Congress doesn't go through regular order. And regular order, when you pass appropriation bills one by one, is how Congress regulates the federal agencies. It's how it tells the EPA, you can regulate this, but you can't regulate that. Or this is what we meant when we passed this law, and you're not abiding by it. That's what we do. That's how we exercise our power of the purse. The problem is, when the Senate doesn't pass a budget, we do one big omnibus spending bill at the end of the year. And when you do that, then the agencies know that they can get away with anything. And they're doing it right now. If you see what the EPA, for example, is trying to do, shutting down the Navajo generating station if they can in northern Arizona. Now their eyes are on Cholla and Coronado and also other co-op plants in southern Arizona. We can't have that. But it's also in the area of healthcare as well. One thing that I can do as a member of the Senate to help business in Gilbert is to repeal Obamacare. That's one thing that we've got to do. We in the House have done it 31 times now, I think. I'll settle for once if we can really do it. But repealing Obamacare is a great start. I vote a lot with Ron Paul, but I don't agree with Ron Paul in that area. I don't think that we can return to the gold standard. I think if people are looking to diminish volatility, if you look back at the time when we did have the gold standards, it was pretty volatile. I think that if we can have a Fed that is a little more transparent, and we can have a Fed that has not the dual role, but the single role of having sound currency, that's the best we can do. But no, I would not advocate for going back to the gold standard. I supported Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal because the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff came to Congress and said, please repeal it. I haven't served in the military, so I looked to those who were in authority. I looked to the brass to make those decisions. And I said, before Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, that I would look to them to make the choice. Now, not every service branch supported that repeal. I doubt you'll ever have unanimity there. But when you have the Secretary of Defense, appointed by a Republican, also the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, also appointed by a Republican, coming to Congress and saying, repeal it, because if Congress repeals it, then we can we can implement it in an orderly, reasonable fashion. They feared that if the Congress didn't repeal it, that the courts would come in and repeal it, and then it would be far more chaotic for the military. In fact, those of us in the House, many of us, who supported the cut, cap, and balance strategy, we said that we will vote to raise the debt limit if we do a cut, cap, and balance strategy. And so the version of raising the debt ceiling that I voted for last year had cuts, significant cuts, across the board and significantly on other programs, to a cap if you look back in history over the past couple of decades, when Congress has really reined in spending, it's been when we've had statutory spending caps, like Graham-Rudman-Hollings, or PAYGO, when it was really working. So you need statutory spending caps, but the problem with those statutory spending caps is they only last for about 5 or 6 years, and then Congress simply waives them. That's why you need the third part, which is a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. Cut, cap, and balance. And so that's why several of us in the House, many of us, said let's not pass this debt limit increase unless you have a cut, cap, and balance strategy. I think that if we can tie it to the debt limit increase, let's face it, you have to raise the debt ceiling when you are spending, or when you're borrowing 40 cents on the dollar. Raising the debt ceiling, remember, is simply paying debts that you've already accrued. Now, a private business might be able to declare bankruptcy, but the federal government can't. And so we know that if we have to raise the debt ceiling, if we can tie it to a constitutional amendment, that's the best way to get it through. So if you ask how you get it through the Congress, tie it to raising the debt ceiling. I'm not familiar with those pieces, but I likely did oppose them. Because we have a $1.2 trillion deficit and a $16 trillion debt. That's why. That's why I don't favor increasing Pell Grants. In fact, we need to cut them. That's why I don't favor a lot of appropriation bills. We simply can't afford it. You have to look at every program that we have in the federal government and put it up against, is this program worthy of borrowing money from your kids and your grandkids? And I don't think that is. I don't think that meets the test. As you know, when I got to the Congress, I saw how Congress was acting, particularly under Republican control. And I thought that was no way for Republicans to act. And so I went to the floor literally hundreds and hundreds of times over a series of years and did what came to be known as the Flake Hour after every appropriation bill. Now, and after a while, Republicans began to be shamed. And Republicans eventually declared a moratorium on earmarks. It took another year or so for the Democrats to do the same. They only did that after I went to the floor again and again and again, offering a privileged resolution to force the Ethics Committee to look at the relationship between earmarks and campaign contributions. But it's finally here. What we need to do now is focus on the administration and the earmarks that come from the President and the administration. Because that's where Congress in the past, under the earmark era, what Congress really did is said, we don't like the way the administration is spending money, so we're going to take over that role in terms of specifically allocating money to projects. That's not right. The Congress's role is to say, if we don't like the way the administration is spending money, then let's change the program. Let's get rid of that authorization. Or let's set certain parameters that allow for fierce competition over grants or whatever else, but not for Congress to get back into basically piling on the spending abuses of the administration by having spending abuses of our own. And so the next step is to make sure that the administration is not moving ahead with these pork barrel projects, because whether it's Tiger grants or whatever else, they're doing a lot of it right now. I truly believed that the best thing to do was to limit your own terms. There was a bit of a movement back then to do so, and a lot of people were. When I got back to Washington, I quickly saw that the whole movement was going away. That institutional term limits on committee chairs and everything else were going as well. And I saw it as a handicap to limit your own terms. Now, I know there's the popular video out there that I said, and if it were me, I would use that too against me, where I said I lied. The truth is, I believed in it when I went back, and I changed my mind. I realized that for every time you look around and see somebody that should have left Congress a long time ago, you come across somebody like John Kyle, who's leaving now after 26 years in Congress. I'm glad he spent every year there. Or you get somebody like Henry Hyde, the author of the Hyde Amendment to prohibit federal funding for abortion. He did that 30-some years ago. He did it every year since, and he was there for 30-some years, retired, and died a year later. I'm glad for every minute that he spent in the Congress. So I think that it's simply best to leave up to the voters. It's too big and it taxes and regulates too much. Senator Kyle has offered stellar representation for the state. He's been conservative on fiscal policy, on national security policy, but he's also been the go-to guy for Arizona issues that businesses in Gilbert have, or the issues that come as a consequence of Arizona being about 83% publicly owned. Forest health issues, mining, mineral rights, multiple use. These are things that won't get done on their own. To have somebody fight, to be able to maintain and manage our forests. Senator Kyle's done a great job with that. We need to make sure that somebody picks up the baton and runs forward on these issues. That's what I plan to do. As I mentioned, you've got to have somebody in the Senate, particularly given the situation our country is in, who's willing to stand up for fiscal sobriety, regardless of who's in charge. That's the record I've had in the House, and that's the record I plan to take through the Senate. So thank you for having me here. I appreciate this forum. Thanks for all you do for so many good causes and candidates.